Direct examination of this witness, Mr. Fawcett.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I approach the witness?
Yes, sir.
Let me show you what's marked as States Exhibit 43, 44, 45. Do you recognize those three exhibits, please?
I do.
All right. What are States Exhibit 43, 44, and 45?
They are photographs I took of the office.
Okay. And do these photographs fairly and accurately depict the scene of the office at the Hahn residence that night?
They do.
Mr. Fawcett, are you saying 43, 44, and 45? I believe you've admitted 42 through 44. Are we overlapping?
Mentioned a couple without moving them into evidence, certainly not publishing them.
All right, that's fine. So these are, I think they were mentioned previously, and I think they were moved for admission, and without objection they were received. But go ahead. And
they're in evidence at this point, Your Honor. 43, 44, and 45.
Just
moved into evidence.
All right. Any objection?
No objection.
Okay. They are allowed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right. Let's pick up with States Exhibit 46. What is States Exhibit 46, please?
It is an enlarged portion of States Exhibit 45, which is a photograph I took that evening.
Okay. On States Exhibit 45, which we'll publish here shortly, there's a sticky note on the desk at States Exhibit 45. Is that right?
Yes.
Is what States Exhibit 46 is a close-up of what exactly?
It's enlarged photograph of the sticky note that is on that desk.
And is this consistent with the photograph in States Exhibit 45, States Exhibit 46, the sticky note?
It is.
The state would offer evidence States Exhibit 46 for illustrative purposes this time.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's allowed for illustrative purposes.
This time the state would ask to publish, beginning with States Exhibit 43, Your Honor.
Yes, sir.
All right, if you would, Agent Johnson, tell us about States Exhibit 43 here, please.
This is a photograph inside the office along the front-facing wall. So the front yard is kind of to the left behind me in this photograph. Through these folding doors is the foyer area. You can see in the background the stairs leading up to the second floor. This was just taken from that corner of the room in that general direction of the office.
If you know, what's on the floor there on the carpet in the office?
I do not remember.
Okay. Let's go to States Exhibit 44, please. Tell us about States Exhibit 44. What's the vantage point here?
This is more centrally in front of that front wall of the house. Again, these are the folding doors leading to the foyer area. You can see beyond this desk is the entryway into the living room. You can see the carpet of the living room here. And beyond, you can see the kitchen. There's the kitchen table, the counters, the doors leading to the backyard. And then on the right side here is another desk.
Let's go to States Exhibit 45, please. All right, tell us about States Exhibit 45.
At this point, I'm standing behind that wooden desk, looking at the glass table desk in the previous picture. Again, here's the entryway towards the living room, kitchen area, the folding doors leading to the foyer. And you can see miscellaneous desk items, including, I marked in my report, a cell phone, a ring, a sticky note, computer, paperwork, phone.
All right. And then State's Exhibit 46. For what it's worth on this publication. Can you tell us what State's Exhibit 46 is, please?
This is an enlargement of the previous photograph where that Post-it note is located on the desk.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes, sir.
That's State's Exhibit 47 for identification purposes. Do you recognize what's depicted in State's Exhibit 47, please?
I do.
What is State's Exhibit 47?
It's a photograph of the kitchen table standing on the west side of the table. So the living room is what I'm facing, and the kitchen back side facing door would be behind me.
Okay. State's Exhibit 48. Do you recognize what's depicted in State's Exhibit 48?
I do.
What is it, please?
It's a photograph of a spiral notebook, a pen, and a handwritten note that are located on top of that kitchen table.
Okay. State's Exhibit 49. Tell us what's in State's Exhibit 49 for identification purposes.
This is a photograph I took of the spiral notebook with the most recent page just opened up. It's just a photograph of those two pages.
All right. State's Exhibit 50. Can you identify State's Exhibit 50, please?
Again, these are items that were on the kitchen table. There were manila file folders, a notebook, and a cell phone.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 50, cell phone, legal pad, and then some manila folders underneath the legal pad?
Yes.
All right. State's Exhibit 51. Can you tell us what State's Exhibit 51 is, please?
In that stack of items we were just talking about, the cell phone, the legal pad, and the manila folders, this is a photograph of the topmost manila folder just opened up.
All right. State's Exhibit 52.
This would be a photograph of the second manila folder, but it's still closed at this point.
All right. State's Exhibit 53. Do you recognize what's in State's Exhibit 53, please?
I do.
Tell us.
The second manila folder in that stack is now opened, and it's just a photograph of that.
All right. State's Exhibit 54. Do you recognize what's depicted in State's Exhibit 54?
I do.
Please tell us what this is.
It is the third and last manila folder that was in that stack of items, and it's closed.
All right. And finally, State's Exhibit 55. Do you recognize what State's Exhibit 55 is?
I do.
And what is State's Exhibit 55?
The third manila envelope, file folder, is open, and it's a photograph of that.
Do State's Exhibit 47 and 48 fairly and accurately depict the items and items on the table that you photographed on the evening of Monday, April 22nd, 2013?
They do.
As to State's Exhibit 49, does this photograph fairly and accurately depict the scene once you opened up the mentioned notebook that was on the table and the first pages of it as you photographed it fairly and accurately depict what was in the notebook?
Yes.
All right. State's Exhibit 50, is that a fair and accurate depiction of some of the items on the table before you start opening up things?
Yes.
All right. And finally, State's Exhibit 51 through 55. Are Are these exhibits, do they fairly and accurately depict the scene as you photographed it, whether you opened up the folders and took them one at a time off the top?
Yes.
All right. And would inclusively all these exhibits, States Exhibit 47 through 55, help illustrate your testimony to this jury?
They would.
All right. Your Honor, the state would move into evidence States Exhibit 47 through 55.
Any objection?
No objection.
They are allowed for illustrative purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. You may say publish these one at a time.
Yes, sir.
Agent Johnson, let's start with States Exhibit 47, please. We have States Exhibit 47 up on the screen here. Can you tell us what we're looking at in a little more detail?
I'm standing in the kitchen, looking at the kitchen table. So the back side facing door of the kitchen's behind me. The doors leading to the backyard are to my left. You can see the living room in the background, and then the doorway to the office in that right corner there. The westmost chair is in front of me, and in the western position of the seating, there is a cell phone, a legal pad, and 3 manila folders stacked on top of each other. In the southern seating position, if you'll remember, the chair was knocked to the floor. There's a spiral notebook, a pen, and that notepad, which has a handwritten note written on top of it. Placard number 12 was used to depict the location of red blood-like stains on the table itself, right here, and also this front-facing ledge of wood. I don't know how to describe that, but there's also some underneath the lip of the tabletop itself, so red stains in all this, that general area.
All right. Let's go to States Exhibit 48, please.
Mm-hmm.
And if you would, what does this illustrate?
This is taken from the southern seating area. Again, the southern chair was on the floor at this point, so I'm just standing at that spot at the table taking a picture. This is a spiral notebook that is face down, if that makes sense. The writing would be, the front of the notebook would be, face down. This is a ink pen, and then this is a pad of paper with a handwritten note.
Right. Now, States Exhibit 49. Tell us what this is going to be.
This is a photograph of that spiral notebook, and all I did was take the topmost page facing me and just open it up. So this would be the top page of the photograph we just saw. I just opened it up and straightened it out to make it more square with my camera's photograph.
Whether you can actually see that writing or not in that published version, States Exhibit 49, you can read this stuff, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go to States Exhibit 50, please. What is this?
I'm standing in the western seating position at this point. Again, looking down at the table at these items. There is a black and color smartphone on top of a legal pad, and then there are 3 manila folders underneath it, all kind of stacked in one pile.
All right. States Exhibit 51. What are we looking at?
I had removed the cell phone and the legal pad at this point, and opened the topmost manila folder.
And I don't know if you could read the very top of that line. Can you see what the printed top line says?
Yes, sir.
What does it say?
Brad Miller for United States Congress call sheet.
Bunch of numbers on that white piece of paper in the folder.
It appears to be.
Okay, great. We could go to State's Exhibit 52, please. Tell us what we're looking at here, please.
This would be the second of the 3 stacked file folders. Just closed. Photograph of it closed.
And the way it's configured, is the bottom of this photo where the chair would be at the table?
Yes,
It's upside down, but this is the way it was configured.
that's exactly how I found it.
Thank you. Let's go to State's Exhibit 53, please. Tell us about State's Exhibit 53.
This is a photograph of that second manila folder opened up.
And the second white page in that folder at the top, do you see some typed writing at the very top also?
I do.
What does it say, if you know?
The ending of it is covered by the top sheet, but from what I can read, it says Brad Miller for United States.
Great. Thank you. Let's go to State's Exhibit 54, please. Tell us what's depicted in State's Exhibit 54.
This is the third and bottommost file that I found on the table that evening, closed.
And this too, upside down, so to speak, is that?
I took a step a little bit to the side, but this would be the table edge, so this is near the seat.
Right.
This would be nearest the seat.
All right, thank you. And then finally, State's Exhibit 55. What are we looking at, please?
This is a photograph of that folder we were just looking at opened up.
And now the upside down aspect of this has been corrected in the position of the photograph, not by you, but the way the photograph is published. Is that right?
Yes, this is.
Show us
just
where the chair would be at the tables. Right. And just the very top of that postcard, what's the moniker at the top of the card say?
Brad Miller Congress, www.bradmiller.org, I believe.
Thank you.
Yes.
What is State's Exhibit 58?
This is the knife that I had collected as item number 15 packaged.
And it's in a protective bag, State's Exhibit 58?
Yes, it's in a paper bag because when I collected, if you want to know, when I collected the knife, we use sharps containers for safety, but they're made of plastic, and because blood and DNA, blood can rot, which will deteriorate DNA. So with the sharps container, I had punctured several holes in it in order to allow air to get in and out of it, so the blood would not rot within the container. So in order to prevent cross-contamination, I then put the plastic sharps container inside a paper bag to protect it.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Let me show you what's been already into evidence and discussed. State's Exhibit 24. Do you see the knife? Just to be clear, State's Exhibit 58, you've identified this knife. Is it depicted in State's Exhibit 24?
It is.
Okay. Could you circle where it is in State's Exhibit 24. Thank you. And so State's Exhibit 58 is in fact the circled knife in State's 24 that you collected from the scene at the Hahn residence that night.
It is.
Your Honor, the State will move into evidence State's Exhibit 58 at this time.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's allowed.
Finally, let me show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 56 and 57. Do you recognize what State's Exhibit 56 and 57 are?
I do.
How so?
They're photographs that I took of item number 15 when I was examining and processing it within the CCBI laboratory in a few days of responding to the initial crime scene.
Right, and you mentioned items. You mentioned you put your own item numbers CCBI does on various evidence matters, right?
Yes.
All right. So the photographs, States 56 and 57, the item number that is photographed in those two exhibits, in fact, is it States Exhibit now 58, the knife that you just identified?
It is.
Okay. So you collected 58 from the residence that night.
I did.
And what do you do with it once you collect it?
Physical evidence that we collected at a scene. When we're done, we go back to the CCBI laboratory. And if we're going to process it right away, then we obviously continue working on it. In this case, and which is normal procedure, physical evidence is then stored in a locker, in a locked locker, in the secure evidence room within CCBI, until at that time where I pull it back out to process it further.
And at some point in time, did you take it out, the knife of States Exhibit 58, and take some photos of the knife?
I did.
And are those 56 and 57?
Yes.
And do States Exhibit 56 and 57 fairly and accurately depict the condition of the knife when you photographed it?
Yes.
Okay. And would they help you illustrate your testimony here today?
Yes.
State would move into evidence States Exhibit 56 and 57 at this time.
Any objection?
No objection.
They are allowed for illustrative purposes.
Thank you, Your Honor. And if the state could publish States Exhibit 56 and 57 at this time.
Yes, sir.
Starting with 56. States Exhibit 56. Tell us what we're looking at, please.
This is a photograph I took days after the initial crime scene investigation within our crime scene laboratory. It's just an overall photograph of the item which I collected as item number 15, which was placard 15 in the crime scene photos. The knife that was found unseen.
All right. And States Exhibit 57, please. Tell us about States Exhibit 57.
This is just the other side of the knife, just flipped over, and I have added a small scale for reference.
And tell us what's the length of that scale referencing?
From this white line on the end to this white line, it's 6 inches. So.
Agent Johnson, you did a variety of other things at the crime scenes that evening, correct?
Yes.
Did you seize or deal at all with you've referenced it, this backpack that was located in the living room on a bar stool?
I did not.
Other than photograph?
No, I did not have anything else to do with that.
The search was the Volvo, the defense car out front that you've identified, the Volvo, was that searched that night to your knowledge?
I took photographs of the exterior of the vehicle prior to the search warrant being executed. To my knowledge, that evening, officers did, in fact, search it. I followed up with them asking if there was anything of interest inside that they requested that I photograph, and there was nothing else they requested, so I had no other activities to do with that vehicle.
Okay. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Ms. Elliott.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. Good afternoon, Agent Johnson.
Hi.
I would like to start out with you. You testify that you're, you work for the City County Bureau of Identification. Is that correct?
It is. And
so when you arrived on scene on Tealwood Drive at approximately 7 o'clock, is that right?
Approximately, yes.
And your role when you got on scene is to, the first thing you do when you get there that evening is to kind of collect information. Would that be fair?
Yes.
Kind of see what's going on from the first responding officers. Is that right?
Yes, we do filter information from either a responding officer or a victim or a complainant in order to understand why, in fact, we were requested for a crime scene investigation.
And so you gather this information to see where your services are best needed?
Yes.
And so your role is not to actually talk to witnesses themselves. Is that right?
Occasionally it is. Occasionally it is. Usually with larger scenes, there are people specifically assigned to be interviewing witnesses, and therefore it was not my responsibility this particular evening to interview any witnesses.
So when you got there that night on April 22nd, the first thing you did was meet with some of the police officers?
Yes.
And in doing that, I think you said you described it as filtering information.
Usually information that that is given to me on scene may be coming directly from a victim or a complainant, or it may be coming from someone who's been interviewing a witness or a victim. And sometimes information that I get initially when I arrive on scene is not always what, 3-4 hours down the road, there may be new information coming in.
So you're gathering information from the police officers as it's known at that time?
Yes.
And you gather that information first before you start doing anything else?
Yes.
And that evening, you gather that information first from Detective Brady? Is
yes.
that right? Was that you met with Detective Brady when you got there?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And he told you several things that had been found out so far in their investigation. Is that right?
It is.
And Ms. Hahn was not there by that point, correct?
That's correct. I was advised that none of the injured parties were on scene. Everyone had been transported to the hospital prior to my arrival.
Including Mr. Broyhill?
Yes.
And you were also told, so you were given some of the basic information, including demographic information about the parties?
Yes.
You were told that Mr. Broyhill was a close friend of Ms. Hahn. Is that correct?
Yes.
The only objection would be just for non-hearsay purpose, Your Honor, to make it clear to the jury.
All right. Objection is overruled. It's noted that this is being permitted not for the truth of what was said at the time, but rather solely to explain what this witness did upon receipt of that information. And members of the jury, I'd ask that you consider it solely for that purpose. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor. You were also told that Mr. Broyhill, let's see, You were told that Mr. Broyhill had been at the Hahn's house that afternoon. Is that correct?
Yes.
After spending a week at the beach with the Hahns?
Yes.
And you were told that he had been staying with the Hahns waiting to attend a doctor's appointment. Is that right?
I believe so.
You were also told that Mr. Broyhill worked with Ms. Hahn for her nonprofit campaign organization.
I believe so, yes.
And you were told that there was a suspicion of Mr. Broyhill embezzling from Ms. Hahn's company, but the topic had not been discussed yet. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were told other information when you arrived so that you could gather everything you needed to figure out how best to approach the situation, correct?
Correct.
And from there, I believe in your report you indicated that Agent Hill also arrived to help you.
Yes.
And that was when you started to look at the exterior of the homes.
Yeah.
And then you noticed you testified earlier about the 2 blood trails. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
So when you talked about the first blood trail, or actually let me back up for just a second. When you testified earlier, you testified saying a blood-like substance.
Yes.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. When we encounter a unknown stain on a scene, and we suspect that it may be blood, we use a presumptive phenolphthalein test to test the sample of blood and see if it reacts positively or negatively to be consistent with with blood. I did several presumptive tests of several stains across the scene, the inside and the outside scenes, that evening using the phenolphthalein test, and every test came back positive for the result of blood. The reason why I refer to them as red blood-like stains is because a presumptive test has been done that you can say the stain in question is consistent with blood. However, until it is actually tested by a lab, I do not have the authority to say that it is in fact blood, which is why whenever I would test a certain sample, presumptively with a phenolphthalein, and it would test positive, I would then collect a sample of that same stain in order to send that particular stain to be tested in a lab.
So throughout your testimony, when you refer to a red blood-like stain, that's what you're talking about, that it looks consistent with blood and it reacts consistent with blood, but at this point, without being tested, you cannot definitively say it's blood.
Exactly.
So getting back to you noticed 2 distinct, separate trails of blood, is that correct?
It appeared, yes.
And did both of these trails of blood begin from the side kitchen door?
There were blood-like stains near that side kitchen door, down the driveway, along the side of the house. But I cannot tell you from the exact point that each of those trails began. I did not, and I cannot tell you the directionality of whether they were moving east-west, west-east. When I was describing them in my report, I was just simply following them the way as I was finding them in my investigation, simply mentioning them that way. But I cannot say for sure exactly the point of origin from either of those trails.
Is that where earlier, when you were gathering evidence, do you use that information that you had learned earlier to help you figure out in what direction that blood is likely going?
Yes. The information I had received earlier was that we had 2 bleeding patients running from the house down the street. From the house down the street.
Where did, with the 2, because at some point you did notice that there were 2 distinct trails of blood, correct?
Yes.
Do you recall at what point you noticed that they were 2 separate?
Yeah, when I was initially first following the trail that began at the edge of the driveway, and that's the one that went around the landscaping of the neighbor's house up to that side door, the red blood-like stains on the door, and then back down around the landscaping into the front of the house, across the street, and across to the Harold's house. I also found, starting in more the middle of the street, I noticed some red blood-like stains, and as I followed them, they continued down Teal Wood over Rainwater to Teal Briar.
Agent Johnson, if with court's permission, if you could approach, would it be fair to say that the blood trails, you picked them up at the base of the driveway?
I followed the first trail from the base of the driveway and around. The second trail I found was more so kind of further into the road itself, and then came again further midway on the street rather than around other properties and.
So the second trail didn't start until out in the street?
If I recall correctly, yes, it was further, a few feet away from the driveway, as opposed to the first trail, which the stains were much closer together, much more of a consistent trail, I suppose.
And the first one is the one that I believe you testified earlier went up to the side door of this home?
Yes.
And then back around up towards this area?
Yes, into the front of the house.
And then across Rainwater?
Yes.
And then the second one started in the middle of Tealwood and stayed in the middle of the roadway for the most part? Is that correct?
Yeah, I pretty much saw stains probably in this general area, picked it up again kind of in the intersection of the streets, and then found a few more stains circling a little bit in front of this house here, and then down cobblestone pathway towards the front of this particular house.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Could you also, you testified about the red biohazard bag. Could you point that out where you photographed that?
Yep. It was approximately, it was near the street. It was approximately, it was definitely between the cobblestone pathway to the front of the house and the street end. So somewhere in this little area there.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That you took pictures of That was that car was located right in front of, I believe it's indicated on the schematic. It's right in front of 1705 Tealwood.
It
correct?
is, yes.
And you testified that the only involvement you had with that was just taking pictures of the exterior.
That's correct.
Right. Other you placed as you traced along these blood trails or blood-like stains, you placed the placards that you testified or the flags, I believe you, and the tea lights that we saw in the video and in the photos, and I believe you also collected samples from those.
Yes, on the exterior scene where I actually placed number placards, those yellow signs on the street, those were stains that were tested with the phenolphthalein presumptive test and then also collected as an item of evidence. So for instance, placard number 1, which was located at the end of the Hahn's driveway, was tested positive for the presence of blood, and it was collected as item number 1.
So you're testing that on scene for the to confirm or to get a presumptive test for the presence of blood, correct?
Yes.
And then you're also collecting the sample to be able to send it in to get a confirmatory test for the presence of blood. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then you can also have that sample to be able to do any additional testing such as DNA or anything else on it. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So you said you collected item number 1, which was from the stain near the end of the driveway. Is that right?
Yes.
And then you collected another sample, I believe it was your item number 2, from, I'm sorry, where was your item number 2 from?
Item number 2 was a sample of the red blood-like stain that was found on the exterior side door of the the neighbor's house. So the house that's on the corner of Rainwater and Tealwood, that side-facing door that had the red blood-like stains on it, placard number 2, if you remember, I put on the stoop rather than sticking it on the door itself. A sample was taken from that.
I believe you testified that there was blood-like stains on the window and then also lower on the door. Do you recall whether you took the sample from the window or lower on the door?
The sample was taken from the window.
And on all of these, when we're going through the samples, did you do the presumptive test for all of these to get the presumptive
Yes.
positive? And all of these tested positive for the presumptive test of blood?
Yes.
Item number 3, where was your item number 3 collected from?
If I could show you on the map.
Sure.
Item number 3 was located in the yard just across from the house on the corner in the Harold's yard. In the Harold's yard. There was a red blood-like stain just on the edge of the yard that was collected, tested and collected.
And was that from, what type of surface did you collect that stain from? Was that from a cement or asphalt, or if you recall?
I can't recall for sure, but it may have been the cement curb, possibly. I really can't. It may have been grass.
Okay. Was all you collected from the first, what we've kind of called the first trail of blood-like stains, correct?
Yes.
You then went back and placed, I think, placard number 4 on the second trail of blood-like stains.
Yes.
And where was, and these placards, I guess it may be somewhat obvious, but these placards, of course, the numbers on the placards correspond to the sample numbers. and your item numbers. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, for this case.
In this case?
Yes.
So item number 4, where was that collected from?
That was located a little bit northwest of in the intersection. If you want me to point, I'd be happy to.
If you don't mind.
Okay. Around in here. It was very windy that night, so in some of my photographs, placard 4 fell over and blew away. But
And then item number 5 was also from this second trail.
yes.
And can you also point out where that was collected from?
Be happy to. There were additional red stains in this general area here, and placard 5 was depicting a stain over here, and that's where the sample was tested and collected.
Thank you. You also talked in your report that the biohazard bag that you found, you searched through that bag.
Yes, I looked through it.
And you mentioned in your report that you found a button.
I've recovered a button inside the kitchen.
Do you recall talking about a button that you found inside the biohazard bag?
I recovered a...
Oh, I'm sorry, a piece of the shirt.
Yes, ma'am. It was a piece of a shirt that was inside the biohazard bag.
And that was you also collected that?
I did.
Going back to 1705 Tealwood, you testified earlier about a pair of shoes in the yard of 1705 Tealwood. Did you collect those?
I did.
And do you recall what item number those have?
Item number 6.
What did you do at this point?
With the shoes?
Or no, I'm sorry, just in general. I mean, everything up to this point has been kind of. Do you typically do everything in the exterior before you go in the interior of the home?
Well, yes, there's potential evidence and items that need to be documented outside, but also we were waiting on a search warrant as well, so it just is efficient, makes sense, and you're diminishing the risk of losing evidence outside when you could just be collecting it and documenting it while you're waiting to go inside.
And I believe you testified earlier that the first thing you do is just kind of a walkthrough of the interior of the home when you go in?
Yes.
And is that just to kind of get an overview to see what you need to do?
It is.
Once you get in?
To get an idea of the layout, possible sequence of events. Again, as I mentioned before, areas that I may want to photograph and focus on, where potential physical evidence may be, to see if there's any additional processing in the forensic discipline, for instance, bullet trajectory, bloodstain pattern analysis, etc. That's the purpose of a walkthrough.
We've heard and seen pictures of especially the kitchen area of 1705 Tealwood. There was a lot of blood everywhere, on the walls, on the floor. I assume you didn't, take samples of everything of blood from all of these surfaces, correct?
Correct. Again, same with the process I used outside with the placards. I put down placards inside of areas that I wanted to specifically test and collect red blood stains from. It would be very inefficient and to collect every single drop of a red stain that I were to see in any scene.
And it sounds like that your attention was drawn to the three pools of blood that you noticed. I believe it was, placards 9, 10, and 11.
Yes.
And you took samples of those. Is that right?
I did.
Does every time you place the placard, does that indicate a sample that you took?
No.
Okay.
Some of the placards were used to depict the location of other physical evidence.
In talking about the pools of blood in 9, 10, and 11, in placards 9, 10, and 11, did you take samples of each of those pools?
I did.
And were you drawn to those, or I assume one of the things that drew you to those three pools was simply the amount?
Yes.
Footwear impressions that you noticed on the floor of the kitchen?
Yes.
And those footwear impressions were all that you noticed were in blood, or blood like what appeared to be blood?
Yes.
Did you try to get impressions of those?
I did try to enhance each of those impressions with a chemical called leucocrystal violet, which is a dye stain that's used to enhance blood-like impressions. It reacts with the hemoglobin in blood, which is why it's a useful tool. I did attempt to enhance each of those impressions. Unfortunately, the mixture came out very foamy and bubbly, and we were unable to render any detail.
So those, I think what you called in your report, footwear impressions A through E, were not useful.
That's correct. They were photographed prior to processing with the leucocrystal violet and photographed after the processing of leucocrystal violet, but unfortunately they were unable to be used for comparisons.
You did take a sample, I think you noted as item number 7, from what you call the kitchen south wall of red blood-like stains. Is that right?
Yes.
And item number 8, on the floor behind the west chair. Is that right?
Yes.
And then, as we talked about, 9, 10, and 11 were the 3 pools of red blood-like stains, correct?
Yes.
Item number 12, red blood-like stains on the northwest corner of the dining table, and that's the picture we saw on top of the table, correct?
It is, yes.
Item 13 was, again, a sample of red blood-like stains from the south of the dining area.
Yes, that would have been where that pantry door was located.
And that was where you put the placard on the floor, because it was on the, what
Yes,
you were trying to
ma'am.
get was on the wall?
Yes.
And then you also collected item number 14, your item number 14, which was red blood-like stains from the kitchen floor near the living room entryway. Is that correct?
Yes.
Your item number 16 was stains from the floor near the end table in the foyer. Is that right?
I thought I took 16 from the hurricane glass, but it may be that was in that general foyer area.
In the area of the base?
Actually, yes. Placard number 16 was used to depict the location of the stains on the hurricane and the framed collage in that foyer area. So the stains were collected, tested from the collage and hurricane base.
The collage and the base in particular?
Yes.
Okay. And then item number 17 was samples collected from the dining chair at the southern end of the table in the dining room itself, correct?
The stains.
I'm sorry, at the wall, the southern wall.
Yes, the stains that were observed on the front-facing dining room wall that looked out into the front yard. There were stains on that front wall, and that's where the stains were tested and collected from.
And then item number 18 was the stains collected from the west wall near the southwest corner of the room. And we're still talking about the dining room.
Yes, and that again would have been the wall that the driveway was right outside of. Front dining room, driveway is next to it. That west wall. Yes.
And the last stain you collected was number 19. And that was the north wall to the west of the kitchen doorway?
Yes, so if you're standing in the dining room, looking into that side kitchen entryway, kitchen's beyond that, standing in that doorway, there were some red blood-like stains to the left, the west of the doorway itself, and those stains were tested and collected.
And so all of those, you did the presumptive test for blood, and they all tested positive for the presumptive tests for blood, correct?
Yes.
And then you collected the stain, and then stored them and took them back to your lab and stored them for further processing and testing as needed. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you also collected other evidence, right?
I did.
You collected shoes from the front yard, as we mentioned earlier.
Yes.
And you collected several bags of clothing from that you got from officers from Raleigh Police Department. Is that right?
Yes.
Did you go to the hospital to collect those items, or
I did not.
You met with them at other locations?
Detective Falk with the Raleigh Police Department had collected the clothing, I believe, at the hospital and brought it to the scene where I was located, where I collected the items from him.
And you also collected evidence from the autopsy of Ms. Hahn?
No.
That was not you?
That was not me. Another agent went to that autopsy.
Okay. And so all of that evidence is available to be tested for whatever purposes is needed, correct?
Yes.
When you you testify that when you arrived on the scene, all of the injured parties were already gone, right?
Correct.
Were you ever requested to go to report to WakeMed Hospital to photograph any injuries there, any of the injured parties there?
No, my sole responsibility in this case was processing the initial crime scene. I was not requested to respond to any secondary scenes.
You did further examination of the evidence you collected back at CCBI, correct?
I did.
I'd like to go through some of that with you. You examined. It looks like you first examined one of the shirts belonging to Mr. Broyhill.
Yes.
And that was I think the first one was your item number 21, which was a white, it kind of sounded like an undershirt.
Yes.
Just a white t-shirt.
Yes.
And you described that it had been cut up the middle and up both sleeves. It sounded like it had been cut off by medical personnel attending to him.
Probably, yes.
And you described in your physical examination of the shirt that it was soaked in blood, or it had blood stains on the front and back, or what appeared to be blood stains.
Yes.
And that it had holes that appeared to be consistent with stab wounds in the front, lower, middle of the shirt.
Yes.
Correct? I believe you found 2 holes that appeared to be consistent with stab wounds. Is that
yes.
right? And you later examined Mr. Broyhill's shoes, the shoes you collected from the front yard of
yes.
Tealwood Place. And you tested these, you did the test for the presence of blood, and it tested positive for the presence of blood.
Yes.
Is that right? And obviously you can't tell by that whether that's not a confirmatory test for blood, correct?
That's correct. Again, that's why we collect a sample to be sent to the lab for further analysis.
And did you collect a sample of the blood from the shoe?
I did. Or no, excuse me, no, I did not.
So that the shoes you just had, that there was a presumptive positive for the presence of blood?
Yes. When we have an object that has suspected blood after being, presumptively tested, the SBI would prefer that if it's, a relatively easily movable object, to send that entire item to the lab so that they can remove what blood they want from where, and they can do it in their own setting, which is why I did not collect my own sample.
You also examined Mr. Broyhill's jeans that he had been wearing, or that you were given by Detective Falk.
Yes.
I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And you noted that both the legs of the pants had both been cut. Again, it seemed like by medical personnel.
Yes.
And they also had the jeans also had blood stains on them that seemed consistent, or I'm sorry, had what appeared to be blood stains on them.
Yes, ma'am.
And I believe your examination said that various hairs and fibers fell off the pants during the exam, and you collected those and put those as another item number.
That's correct. The various fibers and debris that fell off, I collected as my CCBI item number 30.
And that you also did a presumptive test for the presence of blood, and that was positive, correct?
I did. Sorry.
You also examined Mr. Broyhill's the outer shirt that he was wearing, correct?
I did.
And when we talked about the red biohazard bag that you found at the scene, the piece of shirt that you described finding in that bag, that piece fit with this shirt, or it was consistent with it?
Yes, it was consistent with the shirt itself had a clearly missing portion of it. So the piece that I found in the biohazard bag not only fit like a puzzle piece to the shirt itself, but was also similar in color, texture, etc.
And this was, I think you described it as a green-blue plaid button-up shirt.
Yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And it had what appeared to be blood stains on it.
Yes, ma'am.
And it again had two small holes. I think you described it in the lower front right of the shirt that appeared to be consistent with stab wounds.
I mentioned that there were two small holes in that area. Yes.
You examined the knife that you collected from the scene, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And you took the photos we saw, right?
Yes.
And then you also did you collect samples from that knife?
I did a presumptive phenolphthalein test on the knife itself, and it tested positive for the presence of blood. I did not collect any samples myself as it was being submitted to the North Carolina State Crime Lab for analysis there.
And then you mentioned submitting items to the State Crime Lab for further testing. That further testing can include DNA testing.
Yes.
And so you submitted, and I don't know if you personally did, but CCBI submitted a number of items to the State Crime Lab for further testing. Is that correct?
I believe that we sent everything back to the Raleigh Police Department, and from there it was sent to the SBI.
So did you personally have anything to do with that process of sending items to the State Crime Lab to be tested?
I don't believe so, no.
May I have just a moment, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Broyhill's clothes that we talked about, you also collected or were given Ms. Hahn's clothes. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that included the pants and the underwear that she was wearing?
Yes.
And you were provided that by a Raleigh police officer?
Yes.
And that all went into your evidence, as we talked about, correct?
Yes.
And when you're talking about collecting these samples and doing the phenolphthalein tests, the samples that you have, even after doing those tests, those samples they can still be sent to the crime lab for DNA tests or any other further testing that you talked about, correct?
Yes. For example, the stains that I collected from the street, I'm not going to dig up a piece of asphalt and package it and send it off to the state lab. They would much rather prefer a swab of the stain that's in question. So any time we collect a stain for analysis, it's to be sent off. Yes.
Been through 30 pictures today. That's not the entirety of what you took that night, correct?
Certainly not.
You took maybe several hundred pictures that night?
Literally hundreds.
Your Honor, I don't have any further questions. We would reserve the right to recall and would ask Agent Stott to remain available to the process of court.
All right. Mr. Foss? No questions. All right. Very good. Counsel, if you'll approach just for a moment. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a 15-minute recess, and we'll resume at 5 minutes past 4. Please recall the instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation in these matters, and please have no conversation with parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Gather in the deliberation room at 5 minutes past 4. Please leave your notepads in your chairs. If everyone for the state, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would call Officer Robert Williams to the stand.
So if you would, please place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you.
Mr. Fawcett.
Thank you. State's Exhibit 16. State your name for the record, please.
Officer R.P. Williams.
How are you employed, sir?
I'm a officer with the Raleigh Police Department
All right, how long have you been a Raleigh police officer?
for 6 years now.
All right. Any further law enforcement experience?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you so employed and on duty on Monday, April 22nd, 2013, somewhere around 5:20 that afternoon?
Yes, I was.
All right. Tell us about what you were doing and if you responded to a particular call in the Tillwood-Tillbriar area.
I did. I'm a field operations patrol officer, which answers 911 calls with the police department. That afternoon, we got dispatched to a stabbing call at 1705 Tillwood Place.
Okay. Did you respond?
I did.
All right. What time did you get there, if you know?
It was approximately 1725 or 5:25 in the afternoon.
All right. Turning over your left shoulder, does that schematic, State Exhibit 16, look about right? That's sort of the general neighborhood that you're responding to?
Yes, it
All
does.
right. Tell us how you responded and what you did when you got there, please.
I responded from near the intersection of Falls and Noose and Millbrook Road. I proceeded north of Falls and Noose, made a right onto Spring Forest Road, then made a left onto Rainwater. And on here it doesn't show it, but there's actually another entrance on Tillbriar. It loops around. While en route to the call, we got comments either from the first arriving officer or from our communications that the patient was located on Tillbriar Drive. So that's why I turned down the first street on Tillbriar, because I wasn't exactly sure at the time how far down it was on Tillbriar.
Were you in a marked car?
I was.
Where did you come to? Where did you park when you got to the area? If it's depicted on the schematic.
Looking at this schematic, so it would have come in from Tillbriar, the other entrance, which is, I believe by this schematic, maybe further down. But I came around, which I was facing Rainwater when I pulled in. So I probably would have stopped somewhere in this general area here.
All right. And tell us what happened when you stopped.
When I stopped, I proceeded in behind one of the Raleigh Fire Department units. I was behind them as I pulled up. The first responding officer informed fire and EMS that they needed to proceed on into the scene. So I followed in behind them and stopped shortly behind them and proceeded to, I believe it was this residence on the corner here where the victim was located at.
Okay. Tell us how long are you actually on the scene? When you arrived for the time you leave, how long did you stay on the scene?
From the time I arrived to the time I left was probably 2 to 3 minutes.
2 to 3 minutes. And tell us about those 2 to 3 minutes, please.
As soon as I made contact with the victim at the location, fire department members and Wake County EMS members were tending to the patient, so I started trying to interview or speak to some of the people that were standing around in the general area to try to get more knowledge of what had taken place or what was going on.
Okay. When you mentioned the patient and the victim, are we talking about Ms. Hahn, Jamie Hahn?
That's correct.
Where was she when you got out at the scene there for these few minutes you're there, please?
I believe she was laying, she was on the ground somewhere in front of the Harold residence, I believe.
Who did you speak to?
Started speaking to, I believe, some of the neighbors, some other females that were on the scene, who then turned my attention toward a gentleman that was standing there that they advised me was the victim's husband. I went up to this gentleman and asked him what had happened. And he was kind of pacing back and forth, and the only thing he could tell me over and over was, I was upstairs. I was upstairs.
What happens next?
At that time, Officer Fetzer came up to me. He was the first arriving officer, I believe.
Officer Fetzer was the first RPD officer on the scene.
That's correct. He comes up to me, and we discuss who is going to ride with the victim to the hospital.
Ms. Hahn?
That's correct, Miss Hahn. That time, Officer Fetzer just asked me if I would go ahead and ride with Miss Hahn to the hospital.
Is that what you did?
I did.
All right. Tell us about, did you see Ms. Hahn being placed in the ambulance? Any statements she may have made? Any observations you made of her before we get into the ambulance?
No statements or anything. No actions really prior to putting her into the EMS unit.
Okay. At some time, was there a concern about the time? Did someone make a comment about need to hurry up or something like that?
Yes, while we were in the EMS unit, shortly after, I believe, we had pulled off from this location and started to proceed toward WakeMed Hospital. One of the paramedics looked at the other one who was trying to get supplies and stuff that they needed, and made the comment that we need to hurry up. We need to hurry up and get to the hospital. And at that time, I was looking at Miss Hahn, who was laying on the stretcher, and she was kind of looking at me at that time, and she nodded her head twice. And then after that, she was just went motionless.
How many people are in the back of the ambulance with Ms. Hahn, and what is everyone doing at this point on the way to the hospital?
There was two paramedics in the back with me. I was standing to her right side, and they were on kind of on the left side, trying to tend to her at that time.
What observations did you make of any injuries, if you saw anything on Ms. Hahn, and what were the various paramedics doing, and did you do anything to assist?
She had numerous cuts all over her body. The one she, like I say, coded, lay there motionless. The paramedics immediately went into performing CPR, which one paramedic provided airway support. The other paramedic was trying to perform chest compressions and also get fluid started for the patient. So he was kind of multitasking, trying to get everything done. So I asked the paramedic if he would like me to perform chest compressions so that he can do the other medical tasks that he needed to get done, in which he stated yes. At that time, I performed chest compressions from that time until we arrived at WakeMed Hospital.
Did Ms. Hahn ever become responsive in the ambulance?
No, she did not.
Tell us about the arrival at WakeMed and her status as you understood it or observed, and what happened at WakeMed, please.
Once we arrived at WakeMed, they took her immediately into the emergency room. While in the emergency room, they continued CPR. They informed me that they had gotten a pulse and were going to take her up to the operating room at that time.
Were you tasked with any other responsibilities at that point that evening?
Once they took her up to the operating room, I followed in behind her and stayed with her until I was relieved by another officer on the night squad.
Did you observe some of the operations being conducted?
Yes, I wasn't. The operation room, there was another little room that was attached to it, but it wasn't directly a part of the operation room, but I could see through glass windows kind of what was going on inside the room while the hospital staff was tending to her needs.
All right, thank you, also.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Elliott.
Briefly. Good afternoon, Officer Williams. I just have a few questions for you. I believe you testified that you were the second officer on the scene that afternoon.
That's correct.
And so when you arrived, Officer Fetzer was already there.
That's correct.
And in addition to Officer Fetzer, the fire truck was there. Is that right?
That's right. The Raleigh Fire Department, I believe, is one of their engine companies, and also Wake County EMS.
The EMS ambulance was already there as well.
Yeah, they pulled up at the same time because he had gave them the radio communications on the radio that fire and EMS needed to go ahead and proceed in for medical care.
And I understand from your testimony that you were only there a few minutes, but where did you, once you parked, where did you physically go once you got out of your car?
Once I got in my car, I went, we said, to the Harold residence where the Miss Hahn was I believe she was lying on the ground at that time. So I went up to that location. The fire department and EMS workers were tending to her, so I was trying to get more of an investigation of what had happened, what took place by the other people. So I was speaking to some of them while I was waiting on fire and EMS.
And is that where Officer Fetzer was located as well?
He was kind of going back and forth because there were several other people. There was numerous people out there at this time, so he was trying to figure out what was going on, what had happened, to try to get more of the story because we only were provided a few brief comments while we were en route.
Where was Mr. Hahn located?
He was standing near Mrs. Hahn. So he was kind of walking back and forth, pacing back and forth when I walked up.
In the front yard of the Harold's house?
Yes.
And finally, where was the ambulance that took Mrs. Hahn? Where was that ambulance located?
I believe when they pulled in, they were facing the opposite direction from Rainwater. In other words, they were Raleigh Fire Department engine and my car were facing toward Rainwater. I believe they were facing away from Rainwater on Tilbrier.
They were on Tilbrier facing away from Rainwater?
I believe so, yes.
And you said you spoke with Officer Fetzer and you spoke with Mr. Hahn. Did you speak with anyone else while you were there?
Just briefly to the neighbors, and they kind of pointed me toward Mr. Hahn.
Do you recall I'm sorry, I think you said Mr. Hahn said I was upstairs, and he just repeated that several times to you?
That's correct.
By the time you were leaving in the ambulance with Mrs. Hahn, were there more Raleigh police officers there?
They were coming in at that time
arriving.
as well. Right.
And you testify that Mrs. Hahn, your testimony about Mrs. Hahn nodding when the EMS personnel were talking about needing to get to the hospital quickly, was that when you were already in the ambulance, when she was already in the ambulance, or was she still being loaded in?
She was in the ambulance. We had just started to pull off from inside the ambulance, and that's, like I said, I was looking directly at Ms. Hahn at the time, and she kind of nodded her head as if she was agreeing, and then that's when she went motionless.
Before that, prior to the ambulance pulling away from the scene, I think you testified that you never heard Ms. Hahn say anything. Is that right?
That's correct.
See her make movements besides her nodding her head at that. Do you recall approximately how long the ride to the hospital took?
I'm not sure. So we went to WakeMed on New Bern Avenue. Just estimating probably 5-10 minutes.
Moment, Your Honor.
Yes, ma'am.
When you got to the scene, Ms. Hahn was still on the ground in front of the house on Tealbriar. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And correct me if I'm wrong, as you were talking to Officer Fetzer, and I guess Mr. Hahn, EMS began attending to Ms. Hahn?
No, as soon as I pulled up on the scene, said I was behind the Raleigh fire engine. The Raleigh Fire Department and the EMS were already staging in the area, so they kind of pulled up at the same time as I was arriving. They went directly toward Miss Hahn. At that time, I was speaking to some of the other people there, trying to get more idea what had took place, what had went on.
And then, I know we're breaking this down into minutes, but how long are you talking to people before you get in the ambulance with Ms. Hahn?
As soon as I arrived, I started speaking to some of the neighbors, some of the females that were standing there. And like I said, they all kind of pointed me toward Mr. Hahn as the victim's husband. So I immediately went over and started speaking with him. The only question I was able to really ask him was, where were you at when this incident took place? And he repeated over and over, I was upstairs. And that was the time that EMS was getting ready to load her into the ambulance. So Officer Fetzer came over to me and said, you need to ride with her.
And when you got into the ambulance with Ms. Hahn, as soon as you got in, did the ambulance leave immediately?
Yes, as soon as they got her loaded in, ready to go, they proceeded to the hospital.
Any redirect?
There you are. Thank
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. All right. Mr. Fawcett, unless you have a very brief witness, I'm not inclined to start another witness, but if you have somebody that you think can be on and off in the next 30 minutes.
No witness. The state was hopeful to publish some exhibits they've been hearing about today.
That's fine. We can do that.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask to publish 16 denoted as the marked on schematic. And the rest of photos, States Exhibit 18 through 25. Then States Exhibit 27 through 57. And then States Exhibits 106 through 110.
All right. Let's, if you'll hand those to the bailiff, and let's divide them into some groups. It looks like that stack you have in your hand, I believe that might be a good one to start with, one row of jurors, and then if you'll